interpret this except Daniel. So Daniel comes forth, and there in verse 18 of chapter 4, he says, "This is the dream which I, King Nebuchadnezzar, have seen. Now, you, Belteshazzar, tell me its interpretation, inasmuch as none of the wise men of my kingdom is able to make known to me the interpretation. But you are able, for the Spirit of the Holy God is in you." So again, Nebuchadnezzar, he recognizes God as basically the only God. Although they worshiped many gods, he recognizes that this is the true and living God, and he is able, through Daniel, to interpret these dreams and give him a idea of what's going to happen. And of course we read about what the dream meant, the tree, and then basically it's a wake-up call for Nebuchadnezzar, because he's going to wind up without his kingdom, living in a field, eating grass like an ox, his hair drawn out, like they said, like feathers, and his fingernails like claws on a bird. So he went from a king of basically the kingdom that was top in the world at that time, to living in a field like an ox and eating grass. So we see there in verse 37 of chapter 4 there, after he comes to his senses, he basically repents. And we're going to start there in verse 36. "At that time my reason returned to me, and my majesty and splendor were restored to me for the glory of my kingdom, and my councilmen and my nobles began seeking me out. So I was reestablished in my sovereignty, and surpassing greatness was added to me. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise, exalt, and honor the King of heaven, for all his works are true, and his ways just, and he is able to humble those who walk in pride." So he recognizes that his pride brought him low. And then he recognizes that God returned everything to him, and it was increased above what it had been prior to him being brought low. But he recognizes that God is able to do all things. As we go on there in chapter 5, and look at there again, this is another king, Belshazzar. I have a hard time with those names. I normally will just kick them over to Bill or Tom or something like that and call them that, just go on. Same with the towns, they have some towns, and I just call them Kittiquay and go on. So, but we've got this king here has come into play, and he has taken the vessels that Nebuchadnezzar took out of Jerusalem when he sacked the city. He took the vessels out of the temple and put them in his treasury. Well, now, Belshazzar, he took them out, and they're having a party, and he's defiling the vessels from the temple. They're having this big party. They're tasting wine. He gave orders to bring the gold and silver vessels that Nebuchadnezzar, his father, had taken out of the temple, which was in Jerusalem, so that the king and his nobles, his wives, and his concubines might drink from them. And so they're having this big party. Now, when we look back at Nebuchadnezzar, he has dreams. So I don't know what his dreams. We know that God furnished the dreams, but I don't know if he chalked that up to bad pizza or what. The night before, and you're like, I don't know. We're not going to eat that anymore because these dreams are terrible. But God placed them there. But here we don't have a dream. We've got a party going on, and right in the middle of it, this hand appears just out of nowhere. and begins to write on the wall. And when we see what it does to the king there, it said, in verse 6 there, it said, then the king's face grew pale, and his thoughts alarmed him, and his hip joints went slack, and his knees began to knock together. Again, this had a big impact on him. So he initially, he calls up his conjurers, the Chaldeans and the diviners, and gives them the spill of, anybody that can interpret this for me, they're going to have riches, they're going to have authority, they're going to be made the third ruler in my kingdom. So there's a lot to gain if you can interpret this writing on this wall. And of course they can't. And then that really seems to, make him a lot more alarmed there. In verse 9 it said, then King Belshazzar was greatly alarmed, and his face grew even paler, and his nobles were perplexed. So this is getting, as he goes along, this is just getting worse and worse for him all the time. But the queen comes in and says, King, live forever, but I've heard about this guy, this Daniel, that interpreted dreams for your father, and they were right. And I think that he can actually interpret this for you. So there in verse 16, he's talking to Daniel. Daniel's been brought in, and he says, but I personally have heard about you, and you are able to give interpretation and solve difficult problems. Now, if you are able to read the inscription and make this interpretation known to me, you will be clothed with purple and wear a necklace of gold around your neck, and you will have authority as the third ruler in the kingdom. Of course, Daniel turns this down. He doesn't need this because he's got God. But I think it's odd that there's kind of two different Abels here. The first Abel said, I personally have heard about you, that you are able to give an interpretation and solve difficult problems. And then he goes, the next Abel is, if you are able. So that's, to me, was kind of, he was sure the first Abel, and the second Abel, he was qualified by if. It wasn't a done deal. The first Abel, you are. So I don't know what he was thinking there. But he tells him, if you're able to do this. And of course, as we go through, we remember that he interpreted the dream for him, there at the end, after he did there, then Belshazzar gave orders, clothed Daniel in purple, put a necklace on him of gold around his neck, issued a proclamation concerning that he was now had authority as the third ruler of the kingdom. And then that night, the king died, or was slain. We don't know who killed him, but it would be something to think about, that this was something that God had a hand in, because he had defiled vessels from the temple. And then, of course, we've come into the last king there that we're going to talk about this morning. It's Darius. Darius, he came in and kind of put overseers over his kingdom as there. And then he had commissioners over those 120 satraps. And Daniel was one of those that was over them, so that these people were put over the kingdom, and then the three over them, basically to be overseers, to make sure that the king didn't get cheated. Everybody paid their taxes. Everybody did whatever they were supposed to be doing as far as work, as far as labors for the kingdom and things of this nature. So they were very important people. They were high up in the government. And Daniel, being Daniel, when we look back to chapter 1, when he decided he was not going to defile himself. He's carried this through, up now through 3 kings, that he was not going to defile himself. He wasn't going to bow down. He wasn't going to worship. He wasn't going to do anything that took him away from God. And here we see, of course, the jealousy comes in verse 4 there. Then the commissioners and the satraps began trying to find grounds of accusation against Daniel in regard to government affairs, but they could find no grounds of accusation or evidence of corruption, inasmuch as he was faithful and no negligence or corruption was to be found in him. Again, we could substitute able for could. They were unable to find any corruption. And they went about it in a different way to try to discredit Daniel. And there we see that in verse 5 there. Then these men said, "We will not find any grounds or accusations against this Daniel unless we find it against him with regards to the law of his God." So, is that something that can happen to us as Christians? You know, if we live as Christians, as we're supposed to, can the world find fault with us in our dealings like Daniel had? We're upright in our business dealings. We're upright with our interaction with people all over. We do what we love. We are honest. We're truthful. So if anybody's going to find fault with us, they would have to find fault with us because of our love for God. And that would be what these guys did. They put Darius in a very precarious situation. They basically tricked the king and said, "King, let's make a decree that if they don't bow down when the music plays, that they're going to be thrown in the lion's den or punished or whatever." And he said, "Sound like a good day? That sounds like a good deal to me. Let's do this."
Applied to his pride.
Right. Yeah. They were playing on his vanity and his pride, and he said, "Yeah, that's a great deal." And I don't know that he really realized it. And then they throw the little caveat right there at the end. Oh, by the way, because of our laws, if you make a decree, it can't be broken. So they had him in a corner, and they tricked him. Reminds me of lobbyists. So Daniel, as was his custom, he prayed 3 times a day in his upper room where he could be seen through a window. I don't know if he could be seen except if they climbed up on a ladder, but still, he prayed toward Jerusalem 3 times a day. And these guys, they knew what they were doing. They knew this is the only way they could bring Daniel in disfavor with the king. So they go back to the king and say, here he is. He's not doing this. So what are you going to do now? So there he was. The king was in a corner. He couldn't go back on his word. He couldn't break the decree because it was against the laws of his nation. And as we read, he was very distraught over what had occurred. So we look there at 16. Then the king gave orders, and Daniel was brought in and cast into the lion's den. The king spoke and said to Daniel, Your God, whom you constantly serve, will himself deliver you. That wasn't a question that he asked. That was a statement that he made. So we can see at this point in time, Darius had great faith in God at this particular moment. And of course, we know what happened. Daniel was cast into the den. They put the rock over the opening of the den, and he spent the day, the night, a period of time. Darius went home. He didn't sleep. He fasted the whole time. Didn't have any entertainment brought into him, and sleep fled him, it says. In the morning, that's the first thing he did. Let's go pull the rock back. Let's see what's going on. And it says there, when he came near the den to Daniel, he cried out with a troubled voice. The king spoke and said to Daniel, Daniel, servant of the living God, is your God, whom you constantly serve, been able to deliver you from the lions? Then Daniel spoke to the king, O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the mouth of the lions. They have not harmed me, inasmuch as I was found innocent before him, and also towards you, O king. I have committed no crime. So Daniel says God was able. So do we think this is the same angel that was in the furnace? It doesn't say, but it just says an angel came and shut the mouths of the lions. So we see through this that there are several uses of the word able. There's sometimes they're not able, sometimes they are able, but always God is able. Man may not be able to do that, but God is. So as we read on there in that, which I consider the ministry of Daniel up through the first six chapters there, then we know what happens. He brought and threw the rest of the guys and their families into the lions. And if you've ever seen a nature documentary of a pride of lions taking down something, it's like, that was not pleasant. The only good thing about it, it wasn't very long in happening. I would think that they didn't suffer very long, but they were torn to bits by the lions. So, as we go through our walk, through our daily activities, are we always cognizant that we're not able to do some things? I hope we are. At least I am. Man, I wish I could do that, but I just can't. But hopefully we're always cognizant that God is able. And even when we perceive God, I'm not going to say he's not able, but if we're requesting something in prayer because we think God, we know God is able, we know God is able, if he doesn't answer our prayer in the positive sense, is that we're kind of like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It doesn't matter. If he doesn't answer it in a positive sense, it's because if he answered it if he answers it in a negative, if he had answered it in a positive sense, what we prayed for would have been to our detriment. When he says no, it's to protect us. It's to let us reevaluate what we've asked for, that we look at it in a little different light. So, in closing, God is able. God is always able. And having said that, are we willing to follow his commands? Do y'all have anything else? Insights?
Through all this, God was always glorified. And it brought the kings to him to where even Nebuchadnezzar, he still had a problem. He'd glorify him, then he'd go back. It seems like towards the end he glorified him more.
Right.
And he always knew that that was the true God.
Right. He always recognized. So that gives us something to hope for. If we act correctly, maybe somebody that might not be a Christian could see the way we live, the way we act, and they could be like some of these kings. Turn from where they're at and glorify God and help. We've accomplished the purpose then.
God shows us too that sometimes our sorrow helps others to see God and leads them to God.
Correct.
Even through our sorrow, because of the way we handle it.
The strength that we show to handle that particular situation. Because these situations that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were in, I've been in some fairly bad situations, but never anything like that. Thank goodness. So, if there's nothing else, we'll close with a prayer. So if you bow with me, please. Our Heavenly Father, thank you for this first day of the week that you've given us, that we can come together as a family and worship you. As we go on about our service, we'll have songs and more prayers, and then a lesson from your word. And let us always remember that you are able. And because of you, all things are possible. We just have to be willing to follow you, study your word, and be diligent in our walk with you. Be with those that of our number that are ill. Be with those that are suffering from sickness. Bring them back to us. Help their families cope with their illness. Give them strength and comfort. If need be with healthcare professionals that take care of them. Be with us always. Watch over us, guide us, direct us, so that we might be that light upon the hill, that others might see you through us. We ask all of this in Christ's name. Amen.